"We've been hiding it for too long, H. I can't keep IT secret anymore." My mother's voice echoed coldly in the empty room, an undeniable confession that hung in the air. I stood still, without the slightest hint of surprise. Her words didn't shock me, they didn't cause me pain. Oddly, I had known this moment would come. For so long, I had sensed the change in my mother's gaze in every decision she made. I just never imagined that one day, she would admit everything she had been hiding for all these years. The room fell into a deafening silence, and aside from my quiet sigh, there was no other sound. But not a single emotion showed on my face. Calmly, I looked at my mother, my gaze unstrained, as if I had been preparing for this moment all along. Everything around me seemed to freeze, and I knew that from this moment on, my life would never be the same. "You've been hiding this asset for years. And now, it's in the hands of someone you never heard of. But I will uncover the truth, Mother," I whispered, each word coming out with unwavering determination. She could hide it, but I would not let this continue forever. I never expected to be in this situation. I had always believed that my mother's love was unconditional, that our family bond was unbreakable. But the moment I found the hidden folder in her desk, everything changed. It wasn't just any folder. It was a collection of papers, sealed with an envelope that bore her initials. It was strange because I had never seen this folder before. Not once in all the years we spent together did she ever mention it. I remember the moment clearly. I had come to collect a few of her things after her funeral, trying to hold on to something, anything, to keep her memory alive. The house felt empty without her, the silence pressing in from all sides. I wandered through her study, a room I hadn't dared enter in weeks, the walls still holding onto the scent of her perfume. My fingers brushed the drawer of her desk, and the rustling sound of paper brought me back to reality. It was there, sitting in the back, tucked away like a secret too dangerous to share. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first thing I saw was the deed to a piece of property, one I had never heard of before. And as I flipped through the papers, the truth began to sink in, a massive fortune, one that my mother had kept hidden from me, from everyone. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was the name at the bottom of the last page, a name I didn't recognize. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about betrayal. My mother had been hiding something from me, something far deeper than I could have ever imagined. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. Why hadn't she told me about this? And more importantly, why had she chosen to leave everything to someone else? The questions spun around in my head like a tornado. My first instinct was to confront her, to ask her why she had kept these secrets, but it was too late for that. She was gone, but I wasn't, and I would find the answers. I would uncover everything she had hidden from me. As I sat there, in the quiet of her study, I knew this was the beginning of something much darker than I had ever imagined. This was no longer about grieving for my mother. This was about uncovering the truth, a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. I took the papers, carefully tucking them into my bag. My journey had just begun, and no matter where it led, I would follow it to the very end. The days following the discovery were a blur. I had buried myself in the investigation, letting the weight of my mother's secrets consume every waking moment. The papers she had left behind were like pieces of a puzzle, each more perplexing than the last. As I sifted through the documents, I discovered a series of transactions, enormous sums of money moving between accounts, mysterious names appearing as beneficiaries, and, above all, one constant: the name that had appeared on the final page of the folder. The name was Richard Hawk, a man I had never heard of, but whose signature had been present on every legal document. He seemed to be a silent partner in everything my mother had done. And yet, his name was never once spoken in our household. I had no recollection of ever hearing about him, not even in passing. I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Who was Richard Hawk? Why had my mother left him so much of her fortune? And why had she kept him hidden from me? I needed to find him. I needed to confront him and demand answers. The problem was, finding someone like him in a city as sprawling as Boston was easier said than done. But I had no choice. I couldn't rest until I knew the truth. I started my search at the address listed on one of the documents. It led me to a seemingly ordinary townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, far from the wealth and grandeur I had expected. The house was modest, almost unassuming, which only fueled my curiosity. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I was about to uncover. A few moments later, the door creaked open. The man who stood before me was older than I expected, with graying hair and a face that seemed to have been weathered by time. His eyes flickered with recognition the moment he saw me, though he didn't say a word. It was as if he knew why I was there. "Are you Richard Hawke?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied me with a look that was almost too calm, too measured. Then, finally, he nodded. "I am," he said, his voice low, "and I think I know why you're here." I didn't waste any time. "Why didn't you tell me about your involvement with my mother? Why did she leave everything to you?" He leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "It's not as simple as you think," he replied, his tone still calm, but now there was a hint of something else, something guarded, almost defensive. "Your mother and I had a complicated relationship, but I didn't come here to explain myself. I came because I knew you would eventually come looking for answers, and you deserve to hear the truth." His words sent a chill through me. I had always thought of my mother as a woman of integrity, someone who would never betray me. But here I was, standing in front of a man who seemed to know things about her that I couldn't even begin to understand. "Then tell me," I demanded, my frustration mounting. "Tell me the truth. What is this all about?" Richard Hawke hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the ground for a brief moment. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. "Come in," he said. "We have a lot to discuss." I walked into the house, the weight of the unknown hanging heavy over me. I had no idea what I was about to hear, but I knew one thing for certain: the truth was far darker than I had ever imagined. As he led me to a small, dimly lit room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the point of no return. Once I learned what he was about to tell me, there would be no turning back. The secrets that had been buried for so long were finally coming to the surface, and I was about to be forced to confront a reality that would change everything. Richard sat down and gestured for me to do the same. "You're about to learn things that will shake you to your core," he said quietly. "But you need to understand this before you continue your search. Everything you thought you knew about your mother, about your family, is about to be shattered." I braced myself for what was to come, knowing that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could bring me peace. The room felt colder now, the weight of Richard's words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. He hadn't even sat down yet, choosing instead to stand by the window, looking out into the quiet street. His silence was unsettling, like he was gathering his thoughts before unleashing something I wasn't ready to hear. "Your mother wasn't just hiding a fortune, Hannah," he finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "She was hiding a life." I didn't understand. The tension in my chest was rising as I tried to digest his words, but I could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. My mother, the woman I had known all my life, wasn't the person I had thought she was. She had kept secrets, and now I was beginning to realize just how deep they ran. She wasn't just protecting money. She was protecting a legacy, Richard continued, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying the burden he carried. A legacy that goes back much farther than you can imagine. "Legacy?" I repeated, my mind spinning. "What are you talking about? My mother, she was just a businesswoman, right? Nothing special." Richard's lips tightened, and he turned away from the window to face me. "Your mother wasn't just any businesswoman. She was part of something bigger, something much more dangerous than you could ever comprehend." My heart skipped a beat. Dangerous? I could barely breathe as the word echoed in my mind. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, then moved toward a cabinet and pulled out a folder similar to the one I had found at my mother's house. He laid it on the table between us and opened it slowly. The first thing that caught my eye was a list of names I didn't recognize, but they were accompanied by dates and locations, and all of them had a peculiar connection. They all had something to do with my mother, and more disturbingly, they were all involved in a network of shady deals, money laundering, illegal trading, and a series of mysterious disappearances. "These are the people your mother worked with," Richard said. "They were all part of an underground organization, and your mother, she was the key to keeping it running." I sat frozen in my seat, unable to look away from the documents. The world I had known was crumbling before me. My mother, the woman who had raised me with so much love and care, was not who I thought she was. She had been hiding her true involvement in a criminal empire, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. But why? I managed to ask. Why would she keep this from me? Why didn't she ever tell me about any of this? Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes clouded with regret. Because she didn't want you to get involved. She loved you too much, Hannah. She knew what kind of people she was dealing with, and she wanted to protect you at all costs. But when she died, the truth was bound to come out. I felt a wave of anger rising within me, a burning desire to understand why my mother would leave me in the dark about her past. So, all of this fortune, these people, the lies, all of it, it's because of this. My voice cracked with emotion. Richard nodded slowly. Yes, but it's more complicated than that. There's one more thing you need to know, and it's something your mother didn't want you to find out, something she kept hidden even from me. I leaned forward, unable to contain my curiosity. What is it? Richard hesitated, then opened a smaller, sealed envelope from the folder. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of my mother, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. He was older, his face stern, but his eyes held a coldness I had never seen before. This man, Richard said quietly, is the one who ran everything. The organization, the money, all of it. His name was Victor Gable. My pulse quickened as I stared at the photograph. Victor Gable? I whispered. Who is he? What does he have to do with my mother? Richard's expression darkened. Victor Gable was your mother's partner, and he wasn't just a business associate. He was more than that. He was the one who controlled everything. Your mother was his right hand. But as powerful as she was always trying to escape from him, trying to protect you, to keep you away from his world. And when she did, that's when she started hiding things. The truth was beginning to cut through me like shards of glass, and I struggled to breathe. Victor Gable was the key to everything. But he was dead now, or at least that's what I thought. But if he was dead, why was he still looming over every part of this twisted legacy? Richard closed the folder with a finality that made me uneasy. You need to know that everything your mother did, she did to keep you safe. But the moment she died, the people she tried to protect you from came out of the shadows. And now, they're after the fortune she left behind, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. I sat in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with horrifying clarity. My mother had spent her entire life protecting me from a world I had never even known existed. But now, that world was coming for me, and I had no idea how to fight it. The question was no longer about inheritance or family secrets. It was about survival, and I had no choice but to keep going. I spent the next few days in a daze, my mind still reeling from the revelations Richard had shared with me. The truth was far darker than I had ever imagined, and now I felt as though I had been thrust into a nightmare that had no end. My mother, the woman I had always admired, was deeply entangled in a criminal empire, and I was now at the center of it all. The fortune, the people who wanted it, the secrets, it was all too much to process, but there was no turning back. Richard had given me the first piece of the puzzle, but there were still too many questions left unanswered. Who exactly were these people? Why had they let my mother live for so long? And most importantly, why was I being dragged into this mess now that she was gone? I had no choice but to dig deeper. I had to know everything. If I was going to survive this, I needed to understand what I was up against. The next step was clear. I had to find out more about Victor Gable. Richard's warnings echoed in my mind. Gable wasn't just a man. He was the leader of a network that reached into every corner of the underworld. But what was worse was the fact that I still couldn't be sure whether or not he was dead. If he was still alive, then everything was even more dangerous than I had anticipated. I started by visiting the locations mentioned in the documents Richard had shown me. One of them led to a warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. It was abandoned, or so it seemed. The cold, damp air inside sent a shiver down my spine as I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find something, anything, that could give me a clue about Gable's whereabouts. As I walked through the dimly lit space, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and every creak of the old building seemed amplified. I moved quickly, trying to avoid making any noise, my eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of life. Then, I saw it. A small, unmarked door in the back corner of the warehouse. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Without thinking, I approached it cautiously, my breath held tight in my chest. I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into a basement. I hesitated. Something about the basement felt wrong, like I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. But there was no turning back. I had come too far, and I was too close to the answers. I descended into the darkness, each step echoing in the silence. At the bottom, I found a small, dimly lit room with a single desk and shelves full of old files. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the warehouse, organized, almost clinical. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I felt like I had stumbled into the heart of something dangerous. As I began to sift through the papers on the desk, a cold chill ran down my spine. Among the documents was a journal, the handwriting unmistakable. It was my mother's. I picked it up carefully, my hands trembling. As I flipped through the pages, I saw more references to Victor Gable, to deals that spanned decades, to people she had betrayed and those she had tried to protect. But there was something new, something that caught my attention. The last entry was dated only a few months before her death. "They know, the past is catching up with us. I have to get out. If anything happens to me, I need you to take the money. It's the only way you'll be safe. Keep Richard close. He's the only one who can help. I made too many mistakes. I hope you'll understand, Hannah." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mother had known that something was coming. She had been trying to escape her past, but in the end, she hadn't made it out in time. And now, it was all falling into my lap. I closed the journal, a sense of finality settling over me. My mother had left me with a burden I wasn't ready to carry, but I had no choice now. I had to finish what she had started, to protect myself, to protect whatever was left of our family's legacy. Suddenly, a noise from above broke my concentration. Footsteps. Someone was coming. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. I had to act fast. I quickly stuffed the journal into my bag and moved silently toward the stairs. My mind was spinning with possibilities. Who was up there? Had someone found me? Was it the people my mother had warned me about? I crept up the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I reached the top, I carefully peeked around the corner. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing at the entrance of the warehouse, illuminated by the dim light, was a tall figure. It was a man, but his face was obscured by the shadows. I couldn't see his features clearly, but I could tell he was watching the room with a sharp, calculating gaze. He wasn't alone. A woman stood next to him. She was dressed in dark clothing, her posture rigid, as if she were waiting for something. The two of them moved like shadows, speaking in low voices that I couldn't hear. I had to get out of there. Fast, I turned and bolted down the back hallway, my heart racing as I ran toward the back exit. But just as I reached the door, I heard a voice call out from behind me. "Don't run, Hannah. You're not going anywhere." I froze. The voice was familiar. I knew that voice. It was Richard. I stood frozen in place, my hand on the door handle, my heart slamming against my ribs. The sound of Richard's voice echoed through the cold, abandoned warehouse, each word chilling me to the bone. "Don't run, Hannah. You're not going anywhere." I didn't turn around, not yet. I wasn't sure if I was more scared of what he might do or of what I might hear. Richard had always been a man of few words, a man who spoke in riddles and half-truths, but now there was a sharpness in his voice, a coldness that made my stomach churn. I glanced over my shoulder. There he was, standing at the top of the stairs, his face partially obscured by the shadows. His figure was rigid, almost predatory. Beside him, the woman from before was watching me intently, her eyes never leaving me. I didn't recognize her, but her presence felt dangerous, like she was part of something I wasn't supposed to understand. I didn't have time to figure it out. The only thing I knew was that I had to get out of there. Now, with a quick glance around, I saw the narrow hallway that led to a side door, the one I had come through earlier. It was my only chance. I pushed the door open, but as soon as my foot hit the ground outside, I heard the sound of footsteps, fast, purposeful, closing in behind me. I started running. My legs moved faster than they ever had before, the cold night air slicing through my lungs with each breath. I could hear Richard's voice behind me, but I didn't dare turn around. "Hannah, you don't understand. This is for your own good." I pushed harder, the adrenaline coursing through me, the need to escape driving me forward. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by industrial buildings and empty streets. The alleyways were narrow, and every turn I took seemed to lead me further into the darkness. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't let Richard catch up to me. I couldn't trust him anymore. Not after everything he had told me. Everything I had learned about my mother's secret life, everything that had been hidden from me for so long, it all felt like a cruel game, a trap set by people I couldn't understand. I turned another corner, my feet pounding against the wet pavement, when suddenly the world tilted beneath me. I lost my balance and slammed into the side of a building. My head spun, and for a moment, everything went black. When my vision cleared, I found myself on the ground, struggling to sit up. A sharp pain radiated through my side. I could still hear the footsteps approaching, but now they sounded closer, more urgent. They were almost upon me. I pushed myself up, my hands shaking, but before I could get to my feet, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, dark-haired man with a menacing presence. He stepped forward, blocking my way. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice cold, without a hint of emotion. It was the same man I had seen in the warehouse, the one who had been with Richard. I backed away instinctively, my breath coming in short gasps. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The man didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step forward, his hand reaching for me, but I was ready. I kicked out, hitting him square in the stomach, and for a split second, I felt the satisfaction of seeing him stumble back. But it didn't last. With a quick movement, he grabbed my wrist, yanking me forward. "You don't get to decide anymore." I struggled, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't ready to be captured. Not yet, not before I had the answers. "Let go of me," I screamed, trying to break free, but his grip was too strong. His fingers dug into my arm as he pulled me toward the alley, closer to where Richard and the woman stood waiting. "I told you not to run." Richard's voice came from behind me, low and unsettling. I turned my head slightly to look at him. There was no hint of the man I had once known in his eyes. His gaze was cold, hard. The man I had trusted, the one who had once promised me answers, was gone. In his place was someone I didn't recognize. "This was never part of the plan, Hannah," Richard said, his tone tinged with something that sounded almost regretful. But I wasn't fooled. He had been part of this, all of it. I had seen it in his eyes when he first led me into that dark room. He wasn't going to help me. The woman beside him stepped forward, her hand reaching into her jacket. "We don't have time for this, Richard. She's too dangerous to keep alive." I felt a wave of fear surge through me. Too dangerous? What did they mean by that? Richard's face hardened. He glanced at the woman, then back at me. "No, she's not the problem." Before I could react, I felt something cold and metallic press against my side. The man had pulled out a gun, and I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the weapon that terrified me, it was the fact that I had no idea how far they were willing to go to keep me quiet. "Get in the car," the woman said, her voice flat and unfeeling. I wanted to fight back, to run, to scream, but I couldn't, not now. They had me cornered, and no matter how much I struggled, I couldn't escape this. Not yet. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger that loomed over me. And I had no choice but to follow them, to play their game, in order to uncover everything. They shoved me into the backseat of a black car, the windows tinted so dark I couldn't see a thing outside. I didn't speak as the engine roared to life, and the car sped off into the night. The man who had grabbed me was sitting in the front, his eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. The woman sat beside me, silent and cold, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I couldn't move. My thoughts were racing, my body tense as I tried to figure out what to do. Everything had happened so quickly, and now I found myself trapped, at the mercy of these people I didn't even know but who seemed to have their own agenda, one that didn't include me getting out alive. I kept my gaze focused on the dark road outside, pretending to be calm, but inside I was unraveling. The pieces of the puzzle that Richard had started to explain were slipping further out of reach. The more I thought about the things I had discovered, my mother's secrets, Victor Gable, the criminal organization she had been involved in, the more I realized how deep this ran. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a fortune hidden away. There were lives at stake here, including my own. After what felt like hours, the car came to a stop. My heart skipped a beat as the engine cut off, and the man in the front seat turned around to look at me. His expression was unreadable. "We're here," he said flatly. The woman beside me opened the door, and I hesitated for just a moment before stepping out. The night air hit me like a slap, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe freely. The weight of the car, the confinement, was finally gone, but the suffocating fear was still there, gnawing at me. I looked around. The place was deserted, a dark, industrial complex surrounded by tall fences and barbed wire. It felt like a place where no one should be, a place where secrets festered and rotted away in the shadows. "This way," the woman said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Without waiting for me to respond, she started walking toward a large building, the sound of her heels clicking on the pavement. I had no choice but to follow, the man trailing behind me like a shadow. We entered the building through a side door, and the inside was just as cold and foreboding as the outside. It was an old factory, its rusted machinery and dust-covered floors giving off a sense of abandonment. But the deeper we went, the more I realized that this place was far from deserted. There were people here, their faces hidden in the dim light, their eyes watching me closely. I couldn't make out much, but the tension in the air was palpable. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that every move I made was being scrutinized. The woman stopped in front of a door, turning to face me. "This is where you'll stay for now," she said, her tone flat, devoid of any emotion. "We'll have a few questions for you, and then you'll be free to go." I narrowed my eyes, not trusting a word that came out of her mouth. "Free to go? You have no intention of letting me go. None of you do." She didn't respond, her expression unchanging. The man who had been following me stepped forward, pushing the door open with a slight shove. "In," he ordered. I glared at him but stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind me. The room was small and dimly lit, with a single chair in the center and a table against the far wall. It smelled of mildew, and the air was thick with the weight of silence. This was it, I was trapped. But there was one thing I knew for sure: I wasn't going to make this easy for them. I wasn't going to let them break me. I took a seat in the chair, my hands clenched in fists at my sides. I wasn't going to speak until I had to. I wasn't going to give them anything they could use against me. A few minutes passed before the door opened again, and this time, Richard stepped inside. His face was still unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. "Why am I here, Richard?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the table and sat across from me, his fingers drumming lightly against the wood. "You have questions," he finally said, "and I'll answer them. But you need to understand that this isn't just about you anymore. It's bigger than you, bigger than all of us." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes narrowing. "What's bigger than me, Richard? What's going on? What is all of this?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from mine for just a moment. "Victor Gable isn't dead, Hannah," he said quietly, "and he's been watching you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? Watching me? How?" Richard's voice dropped lower. "Victor has been keeping tabs on you ever since your mother passed. He knows about the fortune she left behind, and he's going to come for it, and for you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My mind reeled, trying to process what he was saying. If Gable wasn't dead, then everything I thought I knew was a lie. I had been led into a web of deception, and now I was trapped at the center, with no way out. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you let me walk into this?" Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and guilt. "Because," he said finally, "I didn't want you to get involved. But now it's too late." I sat back in the chair, the weight of his words sinking in. Everything was spiraling out of control, and I had no idea how I could stop it. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going down without a fight. The web was tightening, and I had to find a way to break free before it consumed me whole. The walls of the dimly lit room felt like they were closing in on me, their cold, unyielding presence making it harder to breathe. Richard's words echoed in my mind, but the more I tried to process them, the harder it became to focus. "Victor Gable isn't dead. He's been watching me. How could that be? How could everything I thought I knew, everything my mother had told me, be a lie? I had spent my entire life trusting her, believing she was protecting me. But now, I was left questioning everything. I stared at Richard across from me, waiting for him to say something more, anything that would make sense of this madness. His face was strained, his jaw tight, as if he were holding back something that could change everything. "You can't keep protecting me, Richard," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "You've already dragged me into this. Now, tell me what the hell is going on." He hesitated, looking as though he were weighing his words carefully. Finally, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Your mother," he started, "wasn't just a pawn in this game. She was the queen." I furrowed my brow, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "The queen? What do you mean?" Richard let out a slow sigh, his eyes drifting to the floor. "She was the key to everything. Victor Gable, the organization, the power, it all revolved around her. And when she decided to pull away, to break free of Victor's control, she knew there would be consequences. But she never expected you to become involved." I shook my head. "But she always told me everything was fine. She never once mentioned this. She kept me in the dark all of this time, and now you're telling me she was the key to a criminal empire?" Richard's face darkened, and I saw a flicker of guilt cross his features. "She had to keep you safe. She never wanted you to know the truth because she thought you would be better off without it. She thought you would be able to live a normal life." I stood up suddenly, my heart racing. Normal life. How could I live a normal life if I was surrounded by lies? My entire life was built on lies. Richard's eyes followed me as I paced the room. "You don't understand. The moment she broke away from Gable's hold, she became a target. And when she died, the target passed to you. They think you know everything now. That's why they've been watching you." I stopped in my tracks, my mind spinning. "Who is? Who's after me?" Richard's face hardened. "Victor's people. They're the ones who have been watching you. The people your mother was trying to protect you from. They want that fortune, but more than that, they want control. And you're the last person standing between them and everything they've worked for." I staggered back, the weight of his words sinking in. The man I had trusted, the man who had been my ally through this twisted mess, was part of the very system that had enslaved my mother. I couldn't believe it. I had been living in a false reality, one where the people around me had their own hidden agendas. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I demanded, my voice growing louder, shaking with fury. "Why didn't you warn me? I could have done something before it was too late." Richard's face contorted with frustration, his hands clenched tightly on the table. "I tried to keep you out of it, Hannah. I tried to protect you. But now that you know too much, there's no turning back. Gable's people will stop at nothing to get what they want, and they'll kill anyone who stands in their way." I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to steady myself. Kill anyone who stands in their way. My body trembled with the realization of just how deep this ran. My mother's world was not only about secrets and money, it was a world of ruthless power and danger. I had to act fast. I looked Richard in the eye, my voice quieter but filled with determination. "What happens now? What am I supposed to do?" Richard stood up, taking a step closer to me. "Now, we find Gable. We find his people, and we end this. We can't let him control everything. Your mother's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message, and it's time we send one back." I stared at him, a mix of anger and desperation burning in my chest. I didn't want to trust him, not after everything he'd hidden from me. But I also knew that if I didn't move quickly, if I didn't act fast, I would be swallowed whole by the storm my mother had tried so desperately to protect me from. I looked at the door, then back at Richard. "Where do we start?" Richard's expression was resolute. "We start with Gable's last known location. We find his connections, his hidden assets, and we take everything away from him. We make him pay for everything he's done, for what he's taken from us." I nodded, my heart pounding. The journey was about to get even darker, but there was no turning back now. We were going after Gable, and this time there was no escape for anyone. The web had tightened around me, but I was no longer a victim. I was going to fight back. The first step was finding Victor Gable's hidden location. Richard had promised me that we could uncover his movements, and, by extension, his weaknesses, but I wasn't sure I trusted him. Still, we had no time to waste. The darkness of the situation pressed down on me, and with every passing second, it felt like the walls of the past were closing in. The next morning, Richard and I were sitting in the back of a car, heading toward an area in the city that I had never even heard of before. Richard hadn't told me much about where we were going, and his silence had begun to irritate me. I needed answers. I needed to know everything. "You're still not telling me the full story, are you?" I said, staring out of the window, my voice sharp. Richard shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his briefcase. "You'll understand soon enough. Gable's been operating for years, always staying one step ahead of the law. But now, he's slipping. He's desperate." I raised an eyebrow. "Desperate? If he's so powerful, why would he be desperate? What does he want?" Richard glanced at me briefly before looking back at the road. Gable's power isn't just about money anymore, it's about control. But there's one thing he didn't count on: your mother. She was always the one who kept everything balanced. Without her, the whole operation is falling apart. I thought about that for a moment. My mother, the one person I thought I could trust, had been the linchpin of everything that had now become a chaotic mess. If she had been controlling the entire operation, what did that make me? A part of it. A pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. We arrived at a large, nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. The building was old, its metal walls rusted, but the area around it was eerily quiet. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed the faint hum of activity in the background: muffled voices, distant footsteps. But the place was empty, deserted at first glance. "This is it," Richard said. "This is where it all started." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What exactly are we doing here? Richard led me toward the entrance of the warehouse, his demeanor becoming more serious. "We need to find out what Gable has been hiding here. This is where he stashed everything: files, money, assets, and possibly his next move." He opened the door and motioned for me to enter. Inside, the warehouse was just as silent and cold as it had appeared from the outside. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old machinery filled the room. I noticed the shadows cast by a few crates stacked up against the walls, but there was no sign of life, nothing but the heavy silence. As we moved deeper into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I kept my focus on Richard, trying to ignore the anxiety bubbling inside me. "We're close," he said quietly, pausing in front of a large, reinforced door at the far end of the warehouse. "Behind this door is where Gable kept his most valuable assets." I stepped forward, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "So, what's inside?" Richard hesitated for a moment, then placed his hand on the door handle. "The truth." With a swift motion, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dimly lit, but it was clear that this was no ordinary storage space. Rows upon rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, and on the far side of the room was a large desk stacked with papers and folders. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was it. This was where Gable had hidden his empire. I approached the desk, my heart pounding, and began rifling through the papers. Most of them were contracts and financial statements, but there were also letters, cryptic ones, written in code that I couldn't immediately decipher. But what caught my eye was a thick file buried beneath the rest. It was labeled with a single word: project. I pulled the file out and opened it, my hands shaking. Inside was a collection of documents that seemed to describe a series of covert operations, mysterious transactions, and names of people who were all tied to my mother. I began flipping through the pages rapidly, the documents blurring together until I found something that stopped me cold. A photograph. A black and white image of my mother, standing beside a man I had never seen before. He was older, his face stern, and there was an unmistakable sense of power in the way he held himself. Underneath the photo was a note, written in the same code as the letters, but there was one thing I could make out clearly. "The final piece is in place. The inheritance will be secured." I felt my breath catch in my throat. What was my mother involved in? What did this man, Victor Gable, have to do with the final piece? And what inheritance was this file referring to? The questions were piling up faster than I could answer them, and with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher. Just as I was about to continue searching through the files, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. My heart leaped into my throat. They had found us. I quickly shoved the file back into its place and stood, motioning for Richard to follow. "We need to leave, now." But Richard's face had gone pale. "It's too late, they're already here." The door slammed shut behind us, and before I could react, I heard the unmistakable sound of voices, deep, menacing voices, filtering through the shadows. Someone was here, and it wasn't just Gable's men. I had a feeling this was the moment everything would change. The shadows in the warehouse grew deeper as I stood frozen, my pulse racing. The air seemed to thicken with the imminent threat of violence. Richard's expression had shifted from concern to fear, his eyes darting around the room as though calculating an escape route. But there was nowhere to run. We were trapped. "Get down," Richard hissed, his voice sharp with urgency. Before I could react, he pushed me behind a stack of crates, his body following closely behind. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the hallway outside, growing louder with every passing second. They were closing in. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the crates, trying to steady my breath. Richard was beside me, his eyes scanning the room. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the fear that he was trying to suppress. This wasn't just about the money anymore, this was about survival. Through the narrow gap between the crates, I saw two figures emerge from the darkness. They were both tall, wearing dark suits, their faces obscured by the shadows. They moved with the precision of hunters, methodically checking each corner of the warehouse. My heart skipped a beat. These weren't just ordinary thugs, they were professionals, and they were after us. "We have to get out of here," Richard whispered, barely audible. His hand was trembling as it rested on my arm. I could feel his body tense beside me, and I knew he was preparing himself for a confrontation. But I couldn't move. Something about the situation felt different now. The gravity of what was happening, the secrets, the lies, the threat of Victor Gable's men closing in on us, it was all too much. I didn't just want to escape anymore. I needed answers. I needed to face Gable, confront him for everything he had taken from me, from my mother. I looked at Richard, meeting his eyes. "No, we can't run, not anymore. I'm done hiding." Richard's eyes widened with a mix of disbelief and concern. "You don't know what you're saying. You're walking right into their hands." I shook my head. "I've already walked into their hands, but I'm not going to let them control me. I'm going to end this." Before Richard could protest further, I stood up, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The figures were getting closer, their voices muffled by the distance. I knew this was my only chance. The truth had always been within my reach, but I had never been strong enough to grasp it. Now, I was ready. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the file I had grabbed earlier. It was heavy in my hands, but the weight of it felt somehow comforting. I wasn't just carrying papers. I was carrying the truth, and I was going to use it. I stepped out from behind the crates, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the warehouse. The two men turned toward me at the sound, their eyes narrowing in surprise. They hadn't expected me to confront them head-on. Well, one of them said with a smirk, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like the little girls come out to play." I stood my ground, my hands gripping the file tightly. "I'm not a little girl," I said, my voice steady but fierce. "I'm not afraid of you. I want to talk to Victor Gable." The man exchanged a look with his companion, who was still silent, observing me with cold, calculating eyes. He stepped forward slowly, his gaze locked on mine. "You think you can just waltz in here and demand to see Gable? You're in over your head." "I've been in over my head since the day I found that file," I snapped. "But I'm done running. I'm done being afraid. You're going to take me to him, or I'll make sure you regret it." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You really think you can threaten us? You have no idea who you're dealing with." I took a step closer, my voice hardening. "You're right, I don't. But I know enough to know that you don't have the power here. Gable doesn't have the power, I do." At that moment, the second man, who had been silent up until now, moved. His hand reached into his jacket, and I instinctively braced myself. I didn't know what he was reaching for, but I knew it wouldn't be good. Before I could react, Richard stepped in front of me, his body blocking the man's movement. "Back off," Richard growled, his voice low and threatening. The tension in the room thickened as both men hesitated, sizing each other up. Richard wasn't just a man who'd been hiding secrets, there was something more to him, something dangerous. He was not as innocent as I had once believed. But in that moment, I couldn't worry about Richard. I couldn't worry about anything other than what came next. I had come here for answers, and I wasn't leaving without them. "We're done playing games," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Take me to Victor Gable." The man who had spoken first exchanged another look with his partner, then nodded. "Fine. You want to see him? You will." He turned on his heel and motioned for us to follow. I didn't hesitate. Richard fell into step beside me, though his hand brushed against mine briefly. For a fleeting second, I wondered what side he was truly on, but there was no time to waste on doubt. The man led us through a labyrinth of narrow hallways, the walls closing in around us as we made our way deeper into the heart of the warehouse. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on my chest. This was it. I was about to meet the man who had been at the center of my mother's secrets, the man who had manipulated everything for his own gain, and I was going to take back what was mine. We reached the door at the end of the hallway. The man knocked twice, and when the door opened, I was greeted by a room that was everything I had expected: lavish, cold, and full of power. Behind a large desk sat Victor Gable, his steely gaze locked onto mine as he leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You've finally come," he said, his voice smooth like honey. "I was wondering when you would arrive." The room felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on me as Victor Gable's cold, calculating gaze fixed on me. His smile was a smirk, a predator's grin, as if he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to walk into his trap. I could feel the weight of everything crashing down on me, the decisions, the secrets, the lies, but this was it. There would be no turning back. "You've finally come," Victor said smoothly, his voice low and full of authority. "I was wondering when you would arrive." I didn't speak immediately. I took a step forward, my heart pounding, but my resolve hardening with every step I took toward him. He was sitting there like a king on his throne, and for the first time in my life, I realized that I was the one who was going to take his power away. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice steady despite the rage simmering inside. "My mother, she was part of your empire, and you killed her. You used her, and now you want to do the same to me." Victor's eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. "Your mother was a brilliant woman, Hannah. She was my partner, my right hand. She was invaluable, but she grew tired. She wanted out. She didn't realize the cost of leaving." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "And you killed her because she wanted out. She was trying to protect me. She wanted to protect me from you." Victor laughed softly, leaning back in his chair. "Protect you? She couldn't protect herself. And now you've come to take her place, to inherit what she left behind. But you don't understand, do you? This isn't about inheritance. It's about power. Power that you're not ready for." My chest tightened at his words. I wasn't sure whether he was trying to intimidate me, or if he was genuinely underestimating me. But it didn't matter. I had come this far, and I was not going to back down. "I'm not here for your power, Victor. I'm here for the truth," I said, my voice unwavering. "And you're going to give it to me. Everything you've hidden, everything you've taken, you're going to give it back." Victor's face darkened. "You think you can just walk in here and take it from me? You don't even know what you're up against. I control everything. Your mother was nothing without me. You are nothing without me." His words cut through me like a blade, but they only fueled my resolve. "I'm not my mother," I said through gritted teeth, "and I don't need you to control me. I will take what's mine, and I will end this no matter what it takes." Victor stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor, his tall frame looming over me. His expression twisted into something darker, something more dangerous. "You think you're in control here. You're just a girl, playing in a man's world. You're out of your league." I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, feeling the weight of every decision, every step I had taken to get here. "I'm done being afraid of you, Victor." In that moment, everything felt still. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I could feel the shift, like something inside of me had clicked into place. I was no longer a pawn in this game. I wasn't just looking for answers anymore. I was fighting for my future, for my mother's memory, for everything she had sacrificed. Victor stepped closer, his face just inches from mine. "Then you'll die with her," he hissed, his words dripping with venom. Before I could react, Richard stepped forward, positioning himself between me and Victor, his stance protective, defiant. "No, Victor," Richard said, his voice low and steady. "It's over. We're not here to play by your rules anymore." Victor's gaze flickered to Richard, his face a mask of contempt. "You're betraying me, after everything I've done for you." Richard didn't flinch. "I'm not betraying you, Victor. I'm finally doing what's right." The two men stood there for a moment, an unspoken battle of wills raging between them. But in that moment, something shifted. Victor's arrogance faltered, just for a second, and I seized it. "This ends now," I said, my voice carrying the weight of everything that had been building up inside me. "You're going to give me the documents, all the information on everything, the transactions, the lies, the secrets. You're going to tell me everything, or I'll make sure the world knows the truth about you." Victor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you can destroy me? You're not strong enough." I met his gaze without hesitation. "We'll see about that." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was a dangerous gleam in them as he slid the envelope across the desk toward me. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice low. "Here it is, take it. But know this, even if you destroy me, you will never be free of the legacy I've left behind. I grabbed the envelope, my fingers trembling with the weight of it. I didn't know what was inside, whether it was a confession, a final move in his twisted game, or the truth my mother had died trying to protect me from. But I didn't care. The truth was mine to uncover now. I would burn everything down if I had to, but I was done living in the shadows. Victor Gable had underestimated me, and I was about to show him just how wrong he was. I turned and walked out of the room, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand, Richard following silently behind me. We didn't need to say anything. The battle wasn't over yet, but the fight for my future had just begun. And this time, I wasn't going to lose.